The Seahawks set to head to Green Bay for joint practice in their final preseason game, meaning there's not much time left to impress for the youngsters and veterans battling for roster spots. Who's going to make the cut? Rob and I are going to revisit our 53-man roster projections here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in, whether you are down in San Jose, California in 49ers territory, or listening across the country in Blacksburg, Virginia. We appreciate each and every one of you, and thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We're only a couple days away from the Seahawks preseason finale. They'll have a Thursday practice, a joint practice against the Packers 2 days later, battling Green Bay in the final exhibition tune-up. And then coming up next week, the rosters get trimmed from 90 to 53 players. So, Rob, as we do every year leading up to the final preseason game, we'll have a revised 53, and then next Monday, we will be dishing out the news as the cuts start to trickle in who's going to be on this football team. At least initially, we know the initial 53 changes a lot before week 1, but we'll start to break that down. But right now, it's all about projecting the roster. So we're going to be looking at the last 5 in, the first 5 out, our offensive and defensive depth charts. Jam-packed episode brought your way by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Now for your lead story here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Seattle holding their final practice at the VMAC before hitting the road for Green Bay on Thursday. Full throttle padded practice against the Packers. Joint practice for the second straight year under Mike McDonald. And then Saturday, they will finish off their preseason against the Packers at Lambeau Field, which means there's only a few days left for players to impress if they're trying to make this 53-man roster, make the practice squad, make another team. This is that last tune-up, that last audition, which means it's time for us to look at our 53-man roster projections. Robin, we're going to work backwards this time. Let's talk about the bubble players here, the last 5 in and the first 5 out. And we're going to start on the negative side of the coin here with the first 5 players out. And these are the last 5 guys that don't make the team on our projections. And you and I have a little different thinking on this in a few areas. So I'm curious where you are going this direction right now in terms of the 5 players who right now would be just on the outside looking in if roster cut downs happen today.
Yeah, that's the way I look at this as well, Corbin. Look, obviously, the Seahawks have got to get down to 53-man roster. They've got the practice squad they'll be developing as well. If this was not a 53-man roster, if this was a 58-man roster, then here is players 54 through 58, at least the way that I have it. Number 54 overall, one of my absolute favorite players from the Seahawks rookie class, Connor O'Toole, the edge rusher. I'm intrigued by his speed, his flexibility, his upside as a former wide receiver, but he doesn't quite make the cut for me at this point. Number 54 overall. Next is Marquez Valdes-Scantling, the speedy, straight line-ish kind of wide receiver on the outside. He's a veteran. I have been impressed by his versatility, line up inside in the slot. But again, at this point, I have him at number 55 overall rather than making the 53-man roster. Really quickly here, the offensive tackle that I highlighted a couple of days ago after the preseason game against the Las Vegas Raiders. Frankly, I thought that he was very impressive against the Kansas City Chiefs in preseason game number 2. But Amari Kite, I just think that it's going to be a numbers crunch here. And so I think that the Seahawks are hoping that he is going to be able to get through the practice squad. But still, I'm not so sure that Amari Kite is going to be able to make this roster. I have him as number 56 overall. And then finally, here's one that might surprise some people. Damian Martinez, the running back. Obviously, the Seahawks, like most teams, when you select a player in the NFL draft, typically he makes your roster, especially if he has been impressive in training camp and in preseason games. Damian Martinez has checked every box, but like I just mentioned with Amari Kai, I just don't see how Seattle is going to be able to bring in 5 backs because, of course, you have the fullback. Robbie Oots is going to be part of that, and there's no way you're not going to have Kenneth Walker III, Zach Charbonnet. And again, as I mentioned, or I haven't mentioned yet, but I will here in a moment be mentioning that George Halani, to me, made the cut over Damian Martinez. And finally, last but not least, Demarion Williams. And he is a cornerback. I think the corner is going to be an area of concern for the Seahawks. I have him as a guy that right now is going to be on the outside looking in. Shamar Jean-Charles returning to practice today is notable for the Seahawks. Well, it'll be interesting to see how he performs against the Green Bay Packers in that joint practice and in preseason game 3. But right now I have Demarion Williams as not quite making this roster. But again, all 5 of those players are guys I think that the Seahawks are very, very interested in, would like to bring them back in the practice squad. And hell, who knows, who in the next couple of days, the joint practice and the game itself might be able to carve themselves a spot in the initial 53.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you pointed out Jean-Charles returning to practice today for the Seahawks because both of us have him not making our team because he's on injured reserve to start the season. So this would suggest that is not going to be the pathway that they are going to be going unless he has a setback, which I don't know that I have him making this football team if he's healthy right now. I don't think that I would even have him on my first 5 out. As far as who I've got on my list here, and I didn't go in any particular order. These are just the 5 guys that I see right now being on the outside looking in. But if I had to go in order, Brandon Peely would be the first player on my list at number 54. Because as we talked about yesterday, I think that the nose tackle situation, I am light years ahead of where I was at going into training camp in terms of optimism. I think Quentin Bohanna and Brandon Peely have both earned a spot on this team. I think that you always have to look at the dynamic, though. Who's going to be the guy that I can slip through waivers the easiest? And I think Brandon Peely, it's happened a couple of times in his career already. I just don't see him being a guy that teams are going to be rushing to claim on waivers. It's not a super sexy position. I think Brandon Peely's a guy that they can stash on their practice squad easier than some of the other guys that I have making this football team. So I've got him at my first spot. And then after that, 2 players that maybe would have been surprises at the beginning of camp. Sataoa Laumea, the reason I still have him in my first 5 out is just because this is a guy who started 6 games last year. He's a young player that I know there are some people in the organization still think highly of. It just numbers game wise, and he hasn't played well. I think Laumea is on the outside looking in right now, and he's still a guy they'd like to bring back on their practice squad. I think you could consider Bryce Cabledew here, but Cabledew's been a weird situation. I have not been impressed by what I've seen at practice, but his game action has been pretty good. So I just can't put either one of those guys on my roster here. And you and I are in agreement on Marquez Valdes-Scantling at this point, where I'm feeling like Seattle, they're in a spot where $3 million in guaranteed money, I think that they're going to be in a spot where they might have to eat that money right now because the receiver position is deep. They've got some really good players that are good special teams guys at the back end of the depth chart. MVS hasn't played a special team snap in almost 5 years. So I just don't know where he fits into the equation here for the Seattle Seahawks. And the last 2 guys I have here, I'm in agreement with you on Demarion Williams. Shamar Jean-Charles coming back. Maybe you could lump him in here as well. But I feel like the top 5 cornerback spots have been carved out at this point. And Josh Ross is a guy that's a really good special teams player that if he's able to play this week, I don't know if he's trending in that direction or not, but he's had that hand injury that he had surgery on. If you can get him back, he's been a good special teams guy, and Mike McDonald trusts him from their time together at Michigan. So I think he's still going to be in the peripheral here, but I just think the injury was unfortunate for him, and I don't see him making this roster. Real quick, Rob, with that being said, who are your last 5 in? Who are the 5 players that do make the right side of the bubble here?
Well, I referred to George Halani before. He is a guy that I have firmly on this roster based on what he has been able to do, not only in training camp, but certainly in the preseason games. I think that he has been absolutely dynamic. I thought that he was dynamic a year ago. But George Halani, Jake Bobo, Tyreek Smith, Jared Ivey, and then finally the one that I struggled with the most, the one who's at number 53 overall for me, right on the cusp of making the roster, but you're kind of going back and forth, is Ty Okada. The Ty Okada missed a tackle in this latest preseason game against Kansas City Chiefs. He also didn't fill the run quite as well as I'd like. However, he is a really, really good special teams player. And the late kickoff return for a touchdown, to me, is a little bit spooky. I think that Jay Harbaugh is going to be pounding the table for a couple of players here. I'm going to be mentioning some of these guys when we start breaking down our initial 53 projection. Ty Okada is one guy that I think that just because of the reliability that he offers on special teams and just the depth that he provides as a back half guy at safety, I expect that the Seahawks are going to be using multiple safety looks. And so I do think that Ty Okada, when it's all said and done, makes this roster. Or again, if he doesn't, if he's not part of the initial 53, then he would be number 54 for me as far as guys that I think are going to be a priority to bring back on the practice squad.
As for the guys that I've got just barely getting by on the roster, I've still got Derek Young at the top of this list just because of the money that Marquez Valdes-Scantling is owed. But I think he's absolutely on this roster. George Halani, I have him and Damian Martinez both on my last 5 in because I just think this is an offense. And I'm spooked by the reports, not even reports, literally what's come out of Mike McDonald's mouth about Ken Walker III. I know he's practiced the last 2 days with a day at Topgolf in the middle of those. So he had a day off. I am spooked by the ability for Ken Walker III to stay healthy. I think you have got to have 4 running backs on your roster. So I've got both of them making it in my last 5 in. I think Eric Sauber to this point, he's just too valuable in the run game and special teams. I think you keep him as that extra tight end. And Tyreek Smith with Uchenna Nwosu coming back. If Nwosu would have been on the pup, still, I wouldn't have had Tyreek Smith on here. He would have been a shoo-in. But now that you have Nwosu, that pushes him down a knock on the depth chart. So I think Smith's one of the last guys that makes this team because he's earned it. But Nwosu coming back might put him on kind of a slippery slope a little bit just from a numbers game perspective. When we come back, we've talked about the last 5 in, the first 5 out. We are going to take a deeper dive into our respective offensive depth charts, who we have making Seattle's roster for week 1 of their initial 53. We'll get to that up next here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champion before week 1 even kicks off, this is your moment. So take a flyer on the MVP race. Like for me, example, I think Lamar Jackson, he wants some revenge against Josh Allen. He's going to go get that MVP this year. Or crown your champion in August. I keep bringing up Lamar Jackson, the Ravens. I think this is Baltimore's year to get the Lombardi trophy. Or parlay your division winner dark horses. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bet now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. A special thanks to each and every one of the 12s tuning in. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Diving into our latest 53-man roster projections, Rob, we've talked about the last 5 in, the first 5 out, the true bubble players. Now it's time to reveal our actual full-throttle depth chart here on offense first. And the offensive side of the ball is the one that really creates some conundrums when you're building this roster, because the construction is going to be different just from a personnel standpoint than what we have seen in the past. You're going to have 3 quarterbacks. Jalen Milroe is on this football team. Drew Lock is on this football team behind Sam Darnold. So that's an extra spot you've typically been able to reserve for another position. As I just mentioned, I think you've got a really tough decision on what you're going to do at running back, because Robbie Oots is going to be one of those 4 or 5 if you keep Halani and or Martinez. Receiver, do you keep a 6th one, or do you keep a 4th tight end? there are so many positions here where you're just kind of like, well, if I didn't have that third quarterback, I could keep an extra one of these guys. Or if I didn't have a fullback, I could keep an extra one of these guys. But you have both of them. I think it does create some log jams at some positions that the Seahawks have not had in the past.
Yeah, no question about it. You just articulated the skill positions very well. I think that, surprising to some, the strength of this squad on offense so far has actually been their offensive line. And so I think it's going to, while there's going to be a log jam and say wide receiver or running back, I think you can make an argument there could be a log jam along the offensive line as well. So to me, this is going to be fascinating, especially on the offensive side of the ball, as you just said. So if you were able to view this on YouTube, then you can see my initial 53 or at least initial 25 as I have it on the offensive side of the ball. And if not, I'm just going to kind of run through the names really quickly, and then we can discuss some of the particulars as we go. But at quarterback, I got the 3, Sam Darnold, Drew Lock, Jalen Monroe, all making the squad. At running back, I've got 4 names. Kenneth Walker III, Zach Charbonnet, George Holani is the traditional running backs, Robbie Oots as your fullback. Wide receiver, I've got 5 names: Jackson Smith and Jigba, Cooper Kupp, Torrey Horton, Derek Young, Jake Bobo, as we talked about a moment ago. Marquez Valdez-Scantling being a guy that just did not quite make the cut, along with other players that I'm intrigued by: Cody White, Steven Sims, Ricky White III, et cetera, not making the cut. Tight end, I got 3 names: AJ Bonner, Elijah Arroyo, and Eric Sauber. Offensive tackle, I have 4: Charles Cross, Abe Lucas, Mike Jarrell, and Josh Jones. Offensive guard, I got 4: Gray Zabel, Anthony Bradford, the 2 starters, Christian Haynes, Bryce Cabledew. At center, Jalen Sandell, Oluwatimi. So that's 25 players. Half of the, there's going to be 3 guys on a specialist. I have 25 on offense, 25 on defense, and again, 3 as specialists. Again, those are my 25. It will be interesting because I do think that there are some jobs still on the line, Corbin. It's going to make this preseason finale against Green Bay, and obviously the joint practice a couple of days earlier than that, all the more important when it comes down to determining those final spots.
And I also want to point this out because our listeners, those that are watching, may be saying, well, why is Brady Russell listed as a tight end on there too? You actually have him listed as the long snapper. And here's where that comes into play. If Chris Stahl's not ready for week 1, which that could be the case, his back has been bothering him for several weeks now. If you don't have Chris Stahl in week 1, they have another long snapper on the roster, but you can cut that guy and get him through waivers, and you can just promote him from the practice squad for a couple weeks in a row. So if Chris Stahl is on the roster, that creates a conundrum there. But if he's on injured reserve and you want to be bringing this long snapper up for a few games, you can keep 4 tight ends and kind of cheat the system a little bit to open the year on the 53. So I like what you're thinking because I almost did that myself. That's where I was at on offense. But as far as differences in our depth charts, as I mentioned, I've got 5 running backs. I just don't think Ken Walker III, with the health issues he's had and just the way this offense is built, they're going to run the ball. We've already seen that. I think you've got to keep George Holani and Damian Martinez, especially because Holani is a great special teams player. We're in agreement at receiver with JSN, Cooper Kupp, Torrey Horton, Jake Bobo, and Derek Young. I have 4 tight ends on this roster because I just think they're going to be, if you've noticed this, Rob, in both preseason games, they've ran a ton of 3 tight end personnel, like more than we've seen in the past from Clint Kubiak. So I think he's going to be leaning heavily into that. And Brady Russell's just such a good special teams player that he's got to be on the roster as well. So I've got 4 tight ends and 5 running backs. That makes things harder when you're looking at the offensive line. And that's why I've only got 9 offensive linemen. I don't have Satawa Lamea or Bryce Cabledew making this roster. I have Mike Jarrell and Josh Jones both making this team pretty easily as swing guys. Oluwatimi and Sundell. I've got Sundell starting week 1, by the way. After seeing today that Sundell's still playing with the ones, I think Jalen Sundell is starting to open the season at center. But obviously those 2 guys are both going to be on the roster. So I've got a little bit of a logjam there in terms of the tight end and running back. But at the end of the day, you can have 26 or 27 players on one side of the football, and it isn't really an unbalance because it's all about special teams when you're making these final selections. I just think Seattle's in a position where they can afford to give a few of those spots because of the versatility they've got on defense. They don't have to keep quite as many guys on that side of the ball that also play special teams. But I think it does put strain if you're wanting to keep one of these young offensive linemen that isn't currently in the mix. It's going to be a lot tougher to do that. At some point, you have to cut at certain positions with Jalen Milroe being on the roster and with Robbie Oates being on the roster. There's going to be some spots that you're going to have to risk losing some guys that in the past you wouldn't.
Yeah, and I'll be damned if I'm going to lose talented offensive linemen, especially guys that you drafted. And so Bryce Cable is making this roster, at least in my opinion. If I was had the deciding vote, I think. And look, I defer to you, sir. You've been into all these training camp practices. You've seen a much larger sample set than I have with Bryce Cable do. But I have poured over the game tape as far as Las Vegas Raiders and Kansas City Chiefs, and I don't think that there's been a significant drop-off other than the level of competition, but a significant drop-off from Gray Zabel at left guard to Bryce Cable do at left guard. I did see a significant drop-off from Bryce Cable due to Satawa Lauamea, and that is why I have Bryce Cable do safely making this roster, not even in my last five making it. But at the running back position, it is, while I think that it is one of the most valuable positions in the NFL, and I 100% support what Seattle has done as far as prioritizing in the draft. At the same time, I also think it's one of the easier positions to replace. And so we saw a year ago, I was stunned when George Holani did not make this team. I'm not going to be stunned again by the Seahawks overlooking or at least just not prioritizing quite as highly a running back. I think that Damian Martinez is a really quality back. I think he can be a starter in the NFL, and yet I'm cutting him. I think Cartier Wright can be a quality player, maybe not a starter, but certainly a quality backup. And so it is a risk to put both those guys on the waiver wire, as I am suggesting the Seahawks do at this point. And I love the fact that you mentioned that kind of the differentiation between Brady Russell as a tight end or a fullback or as a special teams guy or whatever. Who cares? Just get him on the roster. He is literally the flag bearer for the special teams unit. So however he gets on the roster, he should be on the roster. And so that's where we are going to differ, and why, again, this week against the Green Bay Packers is going to be fascinating. You mentioned quickly about Jalen Sindel and Oluwatimi. I don't necessarily expect Jalen Sindel to play a lot in the preseason game. I expect him, of course, to start at this point against the Green Bay Packers in the joint practice on Thursday. You put him up against Kenny Clark, we'll see if he can anchor the way that the Seahawks need him to anchor if he's going to be starting in game one against the San Francisco 49ers. So that, to me, still remains very much a debate whether Oluwatimi or Jalen Sindel is going to be Seattle's opening day start center position.
When we come back, we're going to shift gears to the defensive side of the football, where there's still plenty of discussions on what the Seahawks are going to do on that side at the bottom of their roster heading towards the 2025 season. Don't go away. You're listening to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with your friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on the tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices in the app actually drop the closer you get to the opening kickoff, and they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Game Time is the official ticketing partner of Locked On NFL, making it easy to browse the app for an exciting preseason finale between the Packers and the Seahawks at Lambeau Field. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time by downloading the Game Time app, creating an account, and using the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s that are tuning in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. And for your second listen, make sure to check out the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast with hosts Vinny Iyer and Michelle Madjuk. Listen every day to prep to your fantasy draft and become the most informed manager so you can take home your league's trophy this season. Find Locked On Fantasy Football on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We've got the preseason finale coming up for the Seahawks in just a couple days. A huge joint practice padded against the Green Bay Packers at Lambeau Field. A lot going on this week leading up to the final roster cuts, which are due at 1 p.m. Pacific time next Tuesday, the 26th of August. So these decisions, they're going to be a lot of difficult ones. The Seahawks are going to have to be making those pretty quick. And so with that being said, we're dishing out our latest 53-man roster projections. We just dove into the offense. Rob, let's swing gears over to defense, where there's been a lot more injury questions that we've had to discuss throughout camp in terms of guys potentially being on the PUP list or the NFI list or going on injured reserve, all of these different acronyms for guys that are inactive. We've had to discuss that on defense. But one guy that we are not going to be talking about at this point that was just activated from the PUP list is Uchenna Nwosu. Now, he might not be ready to play in the season opener, but him getting activated now would suggest to me that they believe he's going to be ready in the first couple of games. He wouldn't miss 4 games like he would be required on the PUP list. So with him being active, even if he doesn't play in the first game or two, that does take up one of the roster spots that would have gone to another player if he was on the PUP list.
Yeah, and that to me is one of the real breaking news kind of aspects of this. Again, as I talked about just a moment ago, I had 25 players on offense. I also have 25 players on defense, and then those 3 special teams players. So I'm just going to quickly run down through my 25 on defense. Again, for those of you who are listening rather than watching, please watch. Please listen. Thank you so much to all of you, as Corbin often says. So here we go with the edge rushers. You mentioned Uchenna Nwosu. He is on my list. Boye Mafe, Derek Hall, DeMarcus Lawrence, the aforementioned Uchenna Nwosu, as well as Tyreek Smith. He's one of the last guys on my list, but his burst and bend off the edge to me is just very intriguing. And so that's one of the reasons why he makes this roster, at least in my opinion. At defensive tackle, I have Leonard Williams, Byron Murphy, Mike Morris, and Jared Ivey, the undrafted free agent. Corbin, you and I have discussed about him throughout the entire preseason process, as well as training camp. At the traditional nose tackle position, this was a difficult one for me. Certainly, Jaron Reed is a lock. But Quentin Bohanna, I thought, beat out Brandon Peely. Peely has been impressive. That safety a couple of days ago against the Kansas City Chiefs, to me, was one of the flashiest plays I've seen the entire preseason. Not only the Seahawks, but some other clubs as well. And for a defensive tackle of his size to show that kind of burst is intriguing. That said, he didn't quite make the cut for me. At the inside linebacker position, a position I do have some concerns about with depth. So I could be talked into some flexibility here. And that's one of the things I'm going to be talking about here. Ernest Jones and Tyrese Knight, of course. You mentioned about the PUP list and all these different acronyms that can be so confusing. If the Seahawks are not confident that Tyrese Knight is going to be available to them, then maybe they do have to get a little bit creative. There are some different candidates out there, perhaps for trade. That's a topic maybe for a future show. But right now I have Ernest Jones the 4th, Tyrese Knight as your starters, Drake Thomas, Patrick O'Connell as your primary backups. At the cornerback position, Devin Witherspoon, Rick Woolen, Josh Jobe, Nehemiah Pritchett, Shaq Griffin. A caveat here, again, Shamar Jean-Charles being an injury guy. We talked before about some of the other corners that might be available, whether it be Hall, whether it be Demarion Williams. I mean, there are some candidates, but right now I have Seahawks keeping 5 corners. And then 5 safeties as well. Julian Love, Nicky Manwari, Kobe Bryant, DeAnthony Bell, and Ty Okada, as I said, is my number 53 player at this point. That's the 25. Again, I do think that there are still some jobs on the line, but if I had to make a decision on August 19th, that's the 25 on defense that I'd have the Seahawks keeping.
You and I, look, offense, we had some significant differences. Defense, there's really not much that I can argue about. I did not keep that 5th safety in Ty Okada because I ended up taking the extra tight end in Eric Salbert. That's really what it boiled down to for me, is that I get my special teams value and I get a guy that really helps with my run game. I feel confident what Seattle has with their 4 safeties currently. I do think that the 2 positions to watch here, offense, maybe they might claim somebody, but it just feels like offense, what they have is what they're going to roll with. I do wonder if we could see Seattle claim an inside linebacker off waivers, regardless of what happens with Tyrese Knight's health situation. And I'm also wondering if edge is still a position that they could make a move, whether that's Jadeveon Clowney, whether that's trading for somebody like Micah Parsons. Like, I will say this right now. I have heard some things in the last 24 hours that suggest to me that is going to get ugly before it has any chance to get better down in Dallas. Is Jerry Jones going to have the patience to deal with that? If not, then maybe we revisit that discussion, because if you think Trey Hendrickson is a game changer, Micah Parsons would be a really fascinating discussion to revisit there if he's actually available. But on the more realistic side here, I think Clowney is still a name to keep an eye on because he has not signed with anybody. And I think inside linebacker, with or without a healthy Tyrese Knight, I think you've got to be looking to see, is there somebody that has game experience? Because Drake Thomas and Patrick O'Connell have 41 combined regular season snaps on defense together. So they could use another guy that has played on defense, because Josh Ross has none. Like, they just don't have much experience behind their top two guys. So I think those are the two positions to keep a real close eye on. I had Quentin Bohanna beating out Brandon Peely at that nose tackle spot again, because I just think it's easier to slip Peely through waivers and bring him back on your practice squad. And I think you can make an argument for Tyakata or Jarek Reed in that sense too. Reed, maybe another team would block just because of his athleticism, but Tyakata, I think, is a guy that's been shown in the past. Like, he's going to be available off waivers. You're going to be able to pick him up and sign him back to the practice squad. So that was part of my decision-making process there in terms of going with an extra offensive player rather than on defense. And I kept the three main special teams guys because I do think Chris Stahl will be ready for week 1 based on what I've been told. But we'll see, because that is still, like I said, I thought about the Brady Russell thing myself, and then signing another long snapper onto my practice squad that I can just elevate for game day if you have to go down that road. So we'll see what ends up happening for the Seahawks. But I think that the interesting discussion on defense really boils down to what they do at the nose tackle spot. And there could be wrinkles thrown in here. Maybe Jonathan Hankins ends up being ready to come to practice soon. Who knows? That changes things. But I think overall, the general gist of who's going to be making this team, I feel like an extra safety and the backups and inside linebacker, maybe making a move at edge. Those seem like the spots to me, Rob, that maybe we could have some fluctuation between now and when the rosters come in on the 26th.
Yeah, a couple of things here. I love the fact that you mentioned just the flexibility at the inside linebacker position, how it's still a position of concern. Again, to me, the fact that Nicky Manwari is kind of lined up at times at that linebacker position, I just think that his dynamic athletic ability could give the Seahawks some flexibility in that regard. That's part of the reason why I went with the extra safety, is because I think that Manwari is going to be playing multiple positions, so he might be listed as a safety, but I think, again, that you may have some more traditional safeties there. As far as the special teams, you mentioned the long snapper issue. I'm happy that you did. Chris Stahl is a terrific long snapper. I mean, he was a terrific long snapper in college. He's a terrific long snapper his first couple of seasons with the Seahawks as well. He is their long snapper if healthy, but he's dealing with a back issue, and those are always so difficult to project what's going to happen. The Los Angeles Rams are dealing with that, the quarterback position with Matthew Stafford, of course. And so, again, it's just difficult. But if Chris Stahl is unavailable, I've been impressed by what I've seen from the veteran Zach Treiner. The Seahawks brought him in. He played very well against the Kansas City Chiefs, but at the same time, he's an aging player. I think that they might go with Brady Russell. Jay Harbaugh, of course, Seattle's special teams coach, was asked specifically about the kind of the special teams guys that really are like the flag wearers and flag bearers, and his favorite kind of guys. And he mentioned Brady Russell, and he mentioned that Brady Russell can also long snap. I've never seen Brady Russell long snap.
He looked good when I watched him at the football fest earlier this month.
Yeah, and he did not long snap against the Raiders or the Chiefs. So this would be just a blind projection here. But again, without Chris Stahl guaranteed to be on this roster because of his health issues, I just don't know that Zach Treiner is going to be the guy that they're going to bring in for the long term. So again, that's one of the reasons why Brady Russell kind of sneaking his way onto the roster as a long snapper, and then likely playing multiple different roles for the Seahawks. And finally, at that cornerback spot, with Shamar Jean-Charles returning back to the field, again, that could change some things. So I think that at that final corner spot, I just assume, given the money that the Seahawks allocated to Shaquille Griffin, that he is going to make this roster. But I'm fascinated to see in the Green Bay Packers joint practice and the game itself. To me, Shamar Jean-Charles, Demarion Williams, and then Hall, to me, are a couple of the guys, Tyler Hall, are a couple of the guys that are very much playing for that final roster spot. I think that the Seahawks, if I was to change my initial projection here of 25, I would have Seattle actually go with another cornerback. And to me, that is a spot that is very much available to them, available for somebody to kind of seize that opportunity. So that's one of the matchups I'm going to be watching. The Green Bay Packers aren't going to have their starting quarterback in Jordan Love. And so they're going to be having, some different faces at that spot. And so can a wide receiver kind of step up, or can Seattle's corners shut them down? Again, to me, that's going to be one of the matchups to watch in this upcoming preseason game that could ultimately determine one of the final guys to make the Seattle's initial 53.
As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back tomorrow, we're going to be talking a little bit more about that upcoming joint practice, some of the things that we are expecting to see, what we won't see, the value of these practices, and then we are going to start peeling the curtain back on the preseason finale, looking at some players and position groups that we are going to have under the microscope. We'll also open up our mailbag. Make sure to send those questions to us on social media as well. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday night, and thanks for listening in. Go Hawks.